Hi, everybody. So it's our great pleasure and honor to have Professor Frederick Thomas to host a webinar with BioLingo about evolution and cancer. Professor Frederick Thomas is a world-renowned scientist and researcher in the fields of evolution and ecology. He has directed 3 research groups, edited 12 books, and written 2 books in his research career. Professor Thomas has published around 300 articles in international peer-reviewed journals since 1995, including Nature, Proceedings of the Royal Society, and other high-ranking journals. Since July 2010, Dr. Frederick Thomas has been working on projects related to evolution and cancer and has since published more than 70 articles on this topic. Co-founded CREEC in Montpellier, co-edited a book of ecology and evolution of cancer, and co-initiated a laboratory, mainly to work on transmissible cancers. Dr. Frederick Thomas is a recipient of CNRS Silver Medal for Excellence in Research, the Award of Outstanding Research by Beacon University, and the award from the French Minister Le Goût des Sciences. Professor Thomas will now give a presentation titled An Evolutionary Perspective of Cancer.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Can you see my slide? That's okay? Yes. Can you see my slide? Yeah. Okay, so we can start. So, so first, I would like to thank you for this invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you today. And the work I'm going to present now is entitled Evolution and Cancer. So a title that could be potentially surprising for you, since in fact, what could be the links between evolutionary sciences, the way species are evolving and so on, and cancer. And in fact, I will start this presentation by recalling a famous citation by the biologist Dobzhansky. So according to this biologist in 1973, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And as we will see today, cancer is absolutely not an exception. It is even a pure problem of evolutionary biology, as we will see today, from its origin in the story of life until its development in real time in a person who is sick. So can you see all my slides? No problem? Yeah?
No problem.
Okay. So in fact, it is funny to realize that the first papers suggesting that cancer was an evolutionary problem are not new. They were published during the mid-70s with one paper in Nature and one in Science. But paradoxically, it's only pretty recently that we started to fully realize how the adoption of an evolutionary view of cancer could greatly enhance our understanding of neoplastic progression, to improve cancer prevention, and also to improve therapies. And this strong link with evolutionary sciences is due to the fact that just by natural selection inside the body and inside the tumor, it's possible to explain why cancer may become more and more aggressive through time, why natural selection is going to favor the variants that are able to induce the growth of vessels that bring oxygen and nutrient to the tumor, those that are not detected by the immune system, else they are killed. Natural selection is going to favor the cells that are able to establish other colonies inside the body, the famous metastasis, and maybe the most emblematic, at least problematic example of this selection is the selection of resistance to our therapies. So something that can be presented like that, even if this is the vision of the past. You have a tumor that is growing, it is detected by the oncologist, then we decide to apply efficient therapies that are able to kill most of the cells, and maybe you can have sometimes a relapse after. But this process is really more clear if you adopt an evolutionary view of the problem. In that case, you can see that during the tumorigenesis, the cancer is going to become more and more diversified, is going to produce a huge diversity of malignant cells, and then our therapies are just going to select the resistant ones. And if there is a relapse, it will be mostly from the resistant ones. And as you can understand, if you do not have another treatment to kill here the red cells, the person will unfortunately die from cancer and you will be able to do nothing. So what is in fact the origin of cancer? Cancer is not novel. It is known in all the classes of vertebrates. It's not novel. You can detect, for instance, species from the Jurassic period with cancer. And cancer is also known in invertebrate species like mollusk, insect, and even hydra. And for evolutionary biologists, it is in fact a disease that appeared more than 500 million years ago during the transition from unicellular to multicellular organisms. So during this evolution, natural selection favored mechanisms to ensure the cohesion of cells to build functional multicellular organisms. And the evolution of all these adaptations to prevent the escape of selfish clones are in fact anti-cancer adaptations, and they evolved over millennia. And these adaptations have permitted the fantastic diversification of multicellular organisms. The problem of all these adaptations to prevent the escape of selfish clones, they are fantastic, but they are also terrible weakness in our genomes and in our organisms, because when they do not function anymore, whatever the reason, there is a reversion toward this previous unicellular selfishness. And this is basically the definition of cancer, that is to say, from unicellularity to multicellularity during evolutionary time, and back again to unicellularity inside the body in real time. And when the process starts, is going to evolve during few months or years, and malignant cells, again, by natural selection, can acquire novel adaptations to be performant, to be efficient in the malignant lifestyle. So cancer is an ancestral disease because, as I told you, it evolved more than 500 million years ago. But paradoxically, it's a novel story each time, just because cancers are not transmitted between generations. Most of the time, we will see that it's not always the case. We will see after why, but most of the case, in the huge majority of cases, the genetic result of the tumorigenesis die with the person when the person dies. So it's a novel story each time. And for biologists, it is just fascinating trying to understand how it's possible with conditions like that, that in only few years, you evolve from only one cell that goes wrong into a complex and cooperative system, an ecosystem within the ecosystem with strong similarities between organs, between individuals, between species. And to do that, there are only two biological possibilities. The first one is a strong evolutionary convergence. That is to say that only the malignant cells that would be able to organize like that can survive in front of the adversity of the body. Don't forget that we see only the successful cancers. On how many candidates every day, we don't know, but probably a lot. So there is probably a very strong evolutionary convergence. That is to say that when a cancer appears, there are different combinations of cells that can appear, but only certain cells, given the microenvironment, will be able to evolve to the next steps. And again, a novel combination of cells, most of them probably won't evolve. This is the reason why we possess a lot of tumors that sometimes never evolved inside the body, and sometimes they can evolve again. And at the end, there is, of course, a strong convergence between all these successful cancers that are able to reach the last stage, that is to say, the metastatic stage. And the second possibility is called the atavic hypothesis of cancer, that stipulates that cancer would correspond to the reactivation of ancestral genetic programs selected during the Precambrian period. So at this period of the life in our planet, most, if not all, the organisms were unicellular species. And to be simple, the only things that was asked them to do was to proliferate as much as they could, often in adverse conditions. And all multicellular organisms evolved from these unicellular ancestors. So undoubtedly, if natural selection would work as a perfect engineer, it would have probably removed most of the adaptations of these unicellular organisms to build functional multicellular ones. The problem of natural selection is that it does not work like a perfect engineer. It just improves one situation to the next one, but without long-term agenda. And in this context, several adaptations of these unicellular organisms would have not been totally removed from our genomes. They would be more or less present, and their accidental reactivation would lead to this stupid situation in which complex and modern organisms like you and me would be suddenly in competition with living entities that possess adaptations from the Precambrian period. So at the moment, we don't know exactly what is the proportion of cancers that would totally rely on these ancestral programs to evolve, compared to those that do not need these ancestral programs. Because in fact, what you need from an evolutionary point of view is just to have some variability at the beginning. And as soon as you have some variability, natural selection can select and the system can progress. So if you are interested with this topic, I encourage you to read fascinating papers that appeared recently in PNAS, and we also published in the journal Bioessay an article on this topic. So evolutionary biologists are also interested with the evolution of transmissible cancer. So I'm not talking here about cancer that have an infectious causation. I'm sure you know a lot of them. For instance, the cervix cancer that can be due to certain papillomavirus. It can be also the bacteria Helicobacter pylori that is responsible for stomach cancer. It can be also the hepatitis B and C responsible for a large number of liver cancer. But in all these situations, it is the infectious agent which is contagious. It is not the cancer directly. But in few cases, there are cases where the cancer is directly transmissible. That is to say that the infectious agent is the malignant cell. So fortunately, there are not a lot of examples, but they are very impressive. And the first one concerns the Tasmanian devils. So these animals live in the south of Australia. They are particularly aggressive. They bite themselves all the time for food, for females, and so on. And when they bite themselves, they transmit themselves malignant cells that are able to grow from one individual to another. So I have the chance to be at the head of an international lab with Australia, with the Deakin University, with Beata Ujvari, and the University of Tasmania, with Rodrigo Amede, and we have the chance to work on this very strange transmissible cancer. So as you can see, the tumors are absolutely horrible. In only 6 to 8 months, they are able to evolve into these very aggressive tumors. As you can see, it's hyper-infected. You even have larvae of flies inside. And this cancer, in fact, appeared 26 years ago. And we are absolutely sure about that because Australian biologists study Tasmanian devils since very long time. So as you can see, it's impossible to miss this huge tumor. So we are absolutely sure that this cancer appeared 26 years ago. And because it is able to be transmitted and it is also very aggressive, it has eradicated more than 85% of the Tasmanian devils, which is nowadays an endangered species just because of a transmissible cancer. The second case of transmissible cancer concerns a sexually transmitted cancer in dogs. And in this case, biologists estimate that the transmissible malignant cells appeared between 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. So if you're interested with this cancer, I encourage you to read the fascinating papers published by Elizabeth Murchison recently in eLife, Nature, and Science. And more recently, it has been discovered the case of leukemia in bivalves that live in North America. They also found it in Japan recently. And what is fascinating in the case of this leukemia is that the malignant cells are able to survive into the water from one mollusk to another, exactly like the infective stages of a parasite. And what is absolutely incredible too in this example is that malignant cells are able to cross the barrier of species. They are able to infect 5 to 6 bivalve species. So once again, if you are interested, I encourage you to read the papers by Michael Mecher. So for evolutionary biologists like Beata Ijvari and myself, what is interesting is trying to understand what is the perfect storm between a host and between a cancer that can explain why a disease that normally is not contagious can evolve into a transmissible cancer, which is in fact a case of inter-individual metastasis. But once the process is started, it's equivalent to a novel form of life that has been initiated by the cancer process, so a parasitic form of life, and then it has its own evolution of virulence and so on. So at the moment, the number of transmissible cancer seems to be relatively low, but with my postdoc, Antoine Dujon, we very recently published this paper. It's very funny because we used the Drake equation used by physicists during the 70s to estimate the probability of intelligent civilization in the Milky Way. And we adapted this equation to predict the proportion of transmissible cancer that we would currently miss in the current knowledge. And as you can imagine, we underestimate at the moment the number of transmissible cancer. So when the perfect storm is present, and this is unfortunately the case with Tasmanian devils, it is in fact not surprising to see that it's not one but two transmissible cancers that in fact evolved during the last 26 years. So the first one, it was in this part of Tasmania, and then the cancer went into the other parts. And this was 26 years ago. So the good news is that the devils that live in that place are now resistant to this transmissible cancer. We can see spontaneous regression of the tumors. But the bad news is that 6 years ago, a second cancer appeared, and this cancer is independent from the first one. The first one appeared, I think, in a male, and the second one in a female, or the reverse, sorry. And in fact, this is not really surprising, because when the perfect storm is present, it is exactly like during the period of life in our planet. When the conditions were good for the speciation, we had adaptive radiations with thousands of species that could appear in a very short time interval. And this is exactly the case at the moment with Tasmanian devils. Unfortunately for them, the conditions are really good for the emergence of transmissible cancer. And in only 26 years, which is nothing from an evolutionary point of view, we already have the evolution of two transmissible cancers. If you are interested with this topic, I encourage you to read these two fascinating papers that appeared in Science and in PLOS Biology two months ago, involving Rodrigo Amede from our international lab. Evolutionary biologists are also interested with the evolution of the differential vulnerability of species to cancer. It is very well known that not all species are equivalent in front of cancer risk. And all this research is organized around what we call the Petos paradox. So basically, the logic is very simple. It argues that if a cancer is initially due to one cell that goes wrong, large and long-lived animals, like whales, should be full of cancer compared to small and short-lived ones. And if you look at the data, you will see that it's not the case. It's the reason why it is a paradox. And the evolution, the explanation to this paradox is the evolution, which stipulates that, in fact, animals that evolve to be larger as a species are also animals, because of natural selection, that develop mechanisms to offset the increased cancer risk. That is to say that large and long-lived animals would possess some secret against cancer to cope to disease like cancer, at least to prevent them to appear or maybe to tolerate them better. So it means that it is very interesting when you are a biologist to search in the physiology, in the DNA of certain species, trying to understand what are their secrets to cope with cancer. So in addition to natural selection, we can also dream into the idea of performing artificial selection, experimental evolution in the lab, trying to select for additional resistance to cancer. So how we could do that? Just, for instance, by exposing the population of a given species to large quantity of mutagens and to look through time what happens. Probably a lot of populations won't be able to survive. But if certain population after a bottleneck are able to survive, it is very interesting to look at the potential mechanisms we will have select in the lab to resist to cancer. So it's possible to select solutions that already exist. In nature, for instance, it is known now that one of the secrets of elephants to have no more cancer than us, why you will admit that they are larger than humans, it's to have 20 copies of a tumor suppressor gene when humans have only one at the moment. But of course, we can also hope to select for potentially novel solutions that could be at the origin of novel therapies. For ecologists and evolutionary biologists, the resistance to cancer is not only a problem of size and longevity, it is sure that the ecological status of the species is very important to consider. For instance, a small rodent in natural conditions can die theoretically from cancer, it's possible. But in fact, it will die from a cancer only if it does not die before from a more likely explanation, like a predator, like an infectious disease, or an environmental disturbance. So it means that even if this animal can, in theory, die from a cancer, this won't happen very often in nature. So that it's not necessary to search for strong adaptations against cancer in such kind of animals, because the differential fitness value between individuals is not on this parameter, at least all things being equal, compared to other species like top predators or animals that do not have predators, for which this time the differential fitness value between individuals is more likely to be on parameters like the ability to resist to disease like cancer. Evolutionary biologists are also very relevant to explain the timing of occurrence for most of the cancers. Indeed, most of the cancers like breast cancer, colorectal cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer are all diseases that occur in the second part of life, that is to say, after the reproduction has been done. And this is what horrified Charles Darwin when he realized, in fact, that all what happens after the reproduction are evolutionary neutral, because it will change nothing or almost nothing if you have a cancer at 60 years old or 70 or 80 years old, because your reproduction is finished. So it means that there is no selection to maintain strong defenses against cancer. And the problem is that the mutations are also accumulating during the life. So it means that you have more and more mutation for defenses that are less and less efficient. So this is basically the reason why we have more cancer when we get old. So in addition to this senescence problem, there are also more vicious processes like this one called antagonistic pleiotropy. So just what is antagonistic pleiotropy? It's when you have one gene that has a double effect. First, at the beginning of the life, a positive effect, and then a negative effect. If the positive effect at the beginning of the life is very strong, natural selection is going to retain this gene, even if it is going to give you later in life something less nice like a cancer. So just take an example. In this fish from the genus Xiphophorus, males in natural populations suffer from a melanoma, so a very serious skin cancer, and they die very soon because of this cancer. But the congenital mutations that are responsible for this cancer also confer to this fish a very good growth at the beginning of the life. so that these genes are favored by natural selection. And these bad genes also confer a higher aggressivity in these fish so that they defend better the territories and they are preferred by females. So it means that these bad genes that give a cancer in the middle of the life are favored by selection just because these males, even if they die sooner, they reproduce better. And natural selection does not favor the survival, it favors the reproduction. So there are also funny exceptions like this one, the naked morat. So this animal is very strange. It has no cancer. As you can see, there is an aesthetic price to pay for that. So it is a very funny animal because it is very small, like a mouse. You can have it in your hand. But while a mouse will live on average 2 years, naked morats can live more than 30 years, which is absolutely incredible for an animal of that size. So there are a lot of research at the moment on the secret of naked morat to be resistant to cancer. And once again, if you are interested with this topic, I encourage you to read the fascinating papers by Vera Gorbunova and Andrei Selvanov, who are specialists of this topic. Evolutionary biologists are also interested with the differential vulnerability of our organs to cancer. Once again, it is very well known that not all our organs are equivalent in front of the risk of cancer. For instance, it is very common to have a prostate cancer or a breast cancer, but not common to have a brain cancer or a pancreas cancer. So there is at the moment a debate between scientists trying to understand what are the relative importance of intrinsic factors compared to extrinsic factors. So intrinsic factors are, for instance, the number of dividing stem cells in an organ. You can imagine that the higher this number is, the higher is the probability that at least one stem cell goes wrong and initiates a cancer. While the extrinsic factors is, for instance, the exposure of mutagenic substances, which is, of course, not the same for all organs. The skin and the lungs are, for instance, strongly exposed. Remember the oncogenic pathogens I mentioned before, usually they target specific organs and they initiate cancer specifically in that organs and so on. So it is very important, this debate is very important because if cancer is mostly due to intrinsic factors, it means that it is in fact a matter of bad luck. You can do what you want, you will have a cancer if there is a bad mutation. So it means that you can smoke, you can drink, you can have a Why, if it is extrinsic factors, it means that no, you have to be very careful to your lifestyle because it will be correlated to the cancer risk. So undoubtedly, all these explanations are relevant, but I really think also that one part of the explanation is due to evolutionary responses, and it is an hypothesis that we call the evolutionary ecology of organs. So basically, this hypothesis suggests that all the organs within your body are important, they serve as a whole, but clearly certain organs are more essentials than others to keep you alive and able of reproduction. For instance, your fitness is more likely to decrease dramatically if you have a problem in your heart, in your brain, or in your pancreas, which is small and very important, compared to a problem on your gallbladder, on your spleen. Similarly, certain organs are large and in 2 copies, and evidence suggests that you can live correctly, even if only 1 copy is okay. Your reproductive organs, they are absolutely essential for your reproduction, but they are not essential for your survival. You can live without them. The classical assumption, at least in the past, that evolutionary selection optimized all organs to maximize health and longevity is common, but clearly is false. We must keep in mind that we remain first at all the result of natural and sexual selection to maximize the propagation of genes, which does not mean that you have to be in good health as long as possible. Remember these small fish from the genus Xiphophorus, they die sooner from that cancer, but they reproduce better because natural selection favors the reproduction, not directly the survival. So when you transpose this classical concept of evolutionary medicine at the scale of organs, you can expect that natural selection has shaped the functional properties of organs inside the body and also their protection against pathology in a way that maximizes fitness. And because there are trade-offs everywhere all the time, this protection against the pathology cannot be the same and the highest possible in all organs. Said differently, it means that over evolutionary time, probably natural selection has favored keystone organs with better protection against pathologies, including cancer. So at the moment, there are several teams in the world working on this hypothesis, and it is important to acknowledge that we should not consider only invasive cancer, because in fact, the world is not divided into two categories, people that would have a cancer and people that would not have a cancer. We all have oncogenic process in our body, and the more we get old, the more we have. So the question is not, do we have malignant process inside the body? The true question is which ones are going to evolve into this category that is able to kill us and to treat only these oncogenic processes. It is important for different reasons, starting from economical reasons, because with the modern technologies, we will be able to see soon the totality of the iceberg. But this is not the problem. With this logic, we are all at the minimum asymptomatic cancerous patient. So the true question is to treat only those that are going to evolve for economical reason, but also for psychological reason. Because imagine you detect a tumor in a person and you decide to treat it, why this tumor would have killed the person at 200 years old. It's absolutely useless, but the person will come back to her place thinking that she had a cancer, and a lot of parameters will be different for the life of that person, like the happiness, the sleep, and so on. So this is a very important at the moment to consider this. Evolutionary biologists interested with cancer are also fascinated with the comparison between the metastatic cascade and also the biology of invasive species. So as you know, and we have a sad illustration nowadays with the COVID pandemic, almost every day in our planet, because of the globalization, we have different exotic species that are able to arrive, and fortunately, most of them are not able to establish populations, but when they can establish a population, usually the ecological consequences are important after. And in this context, it is just fascinating to realize the similarity between the biology of invasive species and the metastatic process, with a strong similarities at the qualitative level, but also at the quantitative level, with less than 1% of the migrating cells that are able to establish in another place into the body. So the good news is that ecologists and evolutionary biologists are working since decades on invasive species. So it means that there is a cortege of concept and knowledge that could be transposed from ecology to oncology to improve our understanding of the metastatic cascade and hopefully to prevent it. So of course, you can always identify some differences between biology of invasive species and metastatic cascade, but the true challenge, it's not to identify the differences, it's to look if there are similarities enough for solutions that could potentially work with invasive species that could be transposed to prevent the metastatic cascade, because in the huge majority of cases, this is not the primary tumor who kills people, it is the metastasis. So it is very important to understand better the metastatic cascade. Evolutionary biologists that work on phylogeny, so the evolutionary relationship between species, are also very relevant to explore the metastatic process. Because of the huge diversity inside the tumor, we can really say that the cells that are, for instance, present here in this part of the tumor are totally different from cells present in this part. So imagine you have, for instance, a breast cancer with a brain metastasis, it is possible with phylogenetic methods to understand which part of the primary tumor mostly contributed to the metastatic cascade, and then of course to come back on these cells, trying to understand why they have this propensity to migrate and to establish colonies inside. Evolutionary biologists are also interested with the meaning of phenotypic changes in tumor-bearing individuals. It is well known in medicine and in parasitology that when you are sick, you often display a cortege of phenotypic traits that are different from a normal state. And usually we classify this manifestation into 3 categories. They can be byproduct with no adaptive value for the host or for the parasite. They can be host adaptation to fight the infection or to reduce the cost. Like, for instance, it is well known that the fever, for instance, is clearly a host adaptation to fight the infection. And it can be also a pathogen adaptation, manipulation by the pathogen to improve the exploitation. And I'm going just to show you this short video because before I work on cancer, I used to work on host-parasite relationship, especially host manipulation by parasite. And we published this fascinating example in Nature a few years ago. I cannot have the video. Maybe I have to. Yeah, I can. I hope you can see it. Yeah. So this cricket is infected by a worm, and the worm finishes its life cycle into the water and is able to manipulate the behavior of the cricket, making him commit suicide by jumping into the water. And then you can see the emergence of this huge worm. So it is not inside the intestine, it is inside the general cavity, so that he has to make a hole to emerge, and it is exactly what he's doing at the moment. So if you look in the literature in parasitology, you have thousands of examples like that. So the question now is to know if cancer is able to manipulate us. So clearly at the scale of the microenvironment, the answer is yes. Angiogenesis, for instance, in that case, malignant cells are able to convince healthy cells to bring oxygen and nutrient to the tumor. So it is a case of manipulation. But it is also well known that cancer patients have a lot of phenotypic changes in the alimentation, the sleep, the libido, the mood. And clearly, at the moment, we don't know exactly what is the significance of these changes? Are they byproduct? Are they host adaptation to fight the cancer? Or is it, even if the cancer has no more than a few years of evolution each time, some cancer adaptation to improve the progression? So I would like also to attract your attention on the fact that all the phenotypic changes that are known in cancer patients, it's once the cancer is detected, while very often the tumor is present since a lot of time. So clearly, we don't know at the moment, before diagnosis, what are the phenotypic changes in cancer patients and who benefit from them. I would like also to attract your attention on the fact that even if there are host adaptation, this is not necessarily interesting for us nowadays, because don't forget that natural selection favors reproduction and not survival. So that imagine that in case of cancer, you have an adaptation that permits you to improve your reproduction, even if it decreases more your survival. Unfortunately, this will be retained by a natural selection, while a priori, what we would like nowadays, it's not to have 25 children. It's to live as long as possible in good condition. So there is clearly a mismatch between what we have been optimized for by natural selection and what we would like nowadays. And this is why we have to complete with medicine the toolbox of natural selection. So just a few examples that we published with my colleague Frédéric Méry, based at the CNRS in Paris. So we have in our lab Drosophila flies that is genetically modified so that we can induce a gut cancer, a fluorescent gut cancer. And because we can induce the cancer, we can also study immediately after the induction of the cancer what are the phenotypic changes. And there are a lot of phenotypic changes even before the cancer can be detected. And one, an impressive one, concerns the reproduction. Exactly as I said before, females that have a cancer, they die sooner compared to controls. But before to die, they allocate more resources to their immediate reproductive effort. That is to say, they're going to lay their eggs on average 2 days before. So it is a very interesting result because such kind of response was known in the context of host-parasite relationships. For instance, snails that are castrated by trematodes worms before to be castrated are going to lay all their eggs before to maximize the immediate reproductive effort. So we have the same here with Drosophila flies. If you look at these males, if I can start the video, I'm not sure. Can I? Yes. If you look at these males, they are males with a cancer, and they are so sexually motivated that they even display homosexual behavior if there is no females. So of course, if you give them a female, they will prefer the female. But in the absence of females, they are really motivated to reproduce as soon as possible and even display such kind of homosexual behavior, which is amazing. Another paper that we recently published in Nature Communication, we studied the influence of the social context on the cancer progression. So when a fly is alone in his tube, the cancer is progressing very rapidly. And in fact, these insects are gregarious species, and the fact of being alone is equivalent to a stress. And the consequence of the stress is a lower ability to control the progression of the disease. But what is interesting is that depending on the health status of the individuals that you can add to this one, you do not have the same answer on cancer. If you add other cancerous fly with this fly, the cancer of this fly will progress, but not very rapidly. If you add healthy fly, in fact, the cancer is going to progress very rapidly, exactly like when the fly is alone. So we were very interested with this result, and the closer examination revealed that, in fact, there is a social isolation of this fly when it is with the healthy flies. There is a harassment. So in fact, even if it is with the other, it is in fact alone. So we asked the question to know if the fly was able to prefer the group in which the growth of the cancer was reduced. And the answer is yes. But only at the beginning of the disease, that to say when there is still something to do from an evolutionary point of view, that is to say to reproduce. Then later, when the cancer is well advanced, flies are not choosy anymore. So the behavior of healthy flies was different. At the beginning of the cancer, they were not able to detect that those flies were sick. But clearly later, when it is obvious that these flies are sick, clearly they prefer to avoid them. So it was a very strange result, because in that case, it is not a transmissible cancer. But we think that it suggests that in natural conditions, it's never good to be close to individuals that are sick, because in fact, you don't know why they are sick. Potentially, it could be an infectious disease. It's sometimes difficult to detect between a cancer and infectious disease. And even if it's cancer, cancer also comes very often with an immunosuppression that can favor subsequent infections. So that we think that this is the reason why even if this cancer is not transmissible, it's better to avoid them. And in this last part of my talk, I will try to show you why ecological and evolutionary sciences can also contribute to improve cancer therapies. Because probably you will think that, okay, evolutionary sciences, it's nice to explain the origin of cancer, why certain species have cancers more than others, and so on. But in fact, what people would like when they have a cancer is to be cured, and it is normal. So the question now is, can we improve cancer therapies with ecological and evolutionary sciences? And the answer is yes. And I'm going to show you a few examples. So I will start by recalling why we die from cancer. At the moment, the huge majority of people die from cancer because of this process. There is a tumor. Unfortunately, when we detect a tumor now, even if therapies did not start, we know that certain resistant variants are already present, so that we apply the therapy. The person is feeling better because the number of malignant cells is lower, but clearly you're going to favor the resistant ones. And this is the reason why we die from cancer, which is in fact not surprising because humans are an expert in the art of trying to kill all his enemies with a diversity of herbicide, rodenticide, pesticide, herbicide, and so on. And very often the consequence of this strategy is the selection of resistance. And in fact, aggressive chemotherapies, as we used to do in the past, is just an additional example in a long list of martial strategies that ignore that natural selection is one of the most potent life forces known. So cancer evolves. It is basically a bad news because it is because of this evolution that cancer is able to bypass our natural defenses, then our therapies until the last one. And this is the reason why we die from cancer. But for evolutionary biologists, this is not anymore a bad news that cancer evolves, because if cancer evolves, it means that we can also theoretically learn how to drive its evolution, to bring it toward places where it won't be harmful for us, where it will have a very low impact on the quality of our life. So the good news within this perspective is that malignant cells, like all living entities, are governed by natural selection. And as I told you before, natural selection has no long-term agenda. This is not the objective of the cancer to kill you. It's just because this is the logic of improving the progression for better proliferation each time. But it is not, there is no long-term agenda. Why, of course, we can have a long-term agenda and imagine certain strategies to drive the evolution of cancer. So at the moment, a good therapy against cancer is a therapy that kills the maximum of malignant cells without killing the patient. And surprisingly, we look only after on the long-term effect for the survival of the patient, why this should be the first criteria. And this is not necessarily the same. And the best evidence that there is not a systematic correlation between the number of malignant cells that you kill and the survival has been provided by Professor Robert Gatenby, who is based in Tampa, Florida, in USA, at the Moffitt Center. And Bob Gatenby imagined a few years ago what is called the adaptive therapy. So what is the principle of this therapy? Very simple at the moment. So imagine that this is a tumor, these are the susceptible cells, and this is the resistant cells. So if you apply a strong chemotherapy, you're going to kill all the susceptible cells, and the resistant ones are going to win twice. First, because they are not killed, and then because they have no more competitors. And this is absolutely the solution we should avoid, because when you are in this situation, you can do nothing. So instead of trying to eradicate all malignant cells when it is not anymore possible to do that, Bob Gatenby suggested to apply adaptive therapy, so that is to say a lower quantity of chemotherapy, more regularly depending on the growth of the tumor, so that is going to kill only a small proportion of the sensitive cells and is going to maintain the competition between the resistant ones and the sensitive ones, because usually there is a cost at the resistance. So if you kill only a small proportion, you maintain the competition. So the enemy of your enemy is your friend. In that case, these malignant cells, it's not good to kill them. You can reduce the growth of the cancer by maintaining this category of malignant cells. So it is clearly a novel strategy against cancer. So just to be clear, we do not adopt this when it is possible to eradicate a cancer. If you have for instance, in situ carcinoma without metastasis, it's of course the best option to use surgery and to remove the tumor and the problem is finished. But when you have a metastatic cancer that is incredibly hard to cure, clearly it's not anymore possible to eradicate the cancer and you have to change the strategy to maintain the cancer. So of course the price to pay if you go for this strategy is to live with your cancer. But clearly, the good news is that, at least we can hope, you won't die from the cancer. You will live with it, but it won't be responsible for your death. So Bob Gatenby started his demonstrations with mathematical models, and then he tried on mice, and now clearly he's treating his patients, especially patients with prostate cancer, and he has very good results concerning the survival. And the good news is that the patients are still alive, so that the maximum limit is still in front of us. So in fact, we suggested a few years ago in PLOS Biology that potentially it's not Bob Gatenby who invented adaptive therapy, but maybe natural selection did that. Because imagine in that case that these cells are not anymore cells that are resistant to the therapies, but but cells that are resistant to the immune system. Because our immune system, by killing all the time malignant cells, can sometimes select malignant cells that are invisible to the immune system. So if we are in this situation, and if our immune system was absolutely stupid, it would kill all the malignant cells that it can detect inside the body. And by doing that, the invisible ones this time would be those that would win twice by being not killed and then with having no more competitor, and we would die very soon from cancer. So after millions of years of evolution, we can strongly expect that natural selection has optimized our immune system to kill only a small proportion, at least not all the malignant cells it can detect, just to maintain the competition between those that it can detect and the invisible ones. So it means that it is potentially challenging to force the immune system to kill more malignant cells that it was expected to do, because it's always challenging to go against an adaptation. For instance, in case of bacterial infection, if you reduce the fever, that's fine, but only if you have the antibiotics. Else, you will boost the progression of the bacteria. So I'm not saying that we should not use immunotherapy. I think it's very promising, but we have to be aware that potentially we go against an adaptation. So it means that we have to complete the tools to improve the efficiency. So, of course, we should do that for another reason, is that we must be aware that all our cancer defense has been shaped by natural selection during a period of life that is not anymore the case nowadays. Nowadays, we live longer, we are exposed to mutagenic substances, sometimes both together. So clearly, we have defenses that are from yesterday, while today the challenges are different. So it means that we have to complete the defenses and the strategy against cancer. But we could potentially expect to enhance the efficiency of this natural adaptive therapy. Another promising research direction is the use of fake drugs. So I'm going to show you two examples today of fake drugs. Resistant cells, usually they are resistant because in fact they possess pumps that put aside the poison. Okay, so it's the reason why they don't die from the therapy. But this is not free. Of course, there is a cost for the functioning of the pump, but clearly there is a fitness benefit, because when it is a real drug, the sensitive ones are going to die and not the resistant ones. So imagine that you can have now a fake drug that is going to mimic the real drug without killing the cells. If the resistant ones continue to systematically put aside a poison that is not a poison, because it is a fake drug, they will lose all their energy, but for nothing, and there is no survival benefit in that case. So you will tell me, okay, but the tumor is growing. Yes, the tumor is growing, but it is growing with the sensitive part of the population. So it means that if you alternate real drug, fake drug, real drug, fake drug, you can theoretically keep constant the size of the tumor. Another fake drug, very interesting, I'm working on it with my colleague Marie Dutrex from the Institut Curie in Paris, consists in sending a fake damage signal to malignant cells. As you will see, it's fascinating. As you know, malignant cells are highly unstable and they occasionate a lot of damages in their own DNA, and they have to repair it all the time, else they could not even function. So a first strategy, imagine, was of course to prevent them to repair their DNA, hoping that they would go toward a genetic disaster. So it works, but sometimes it does not work anymore because sooner or later, malignant cells are able to find alternative solutions. And I would like to say that maybe after a given threshold in the evolution of cancer, when there is a huge diversity inside the tumor, all the strategies that are based on the logic, we're going to prevent cells to do that, will fail, because sooner or later you will select resistant ones. So us, instead of preventing them to repair, we send them a fake drug that is going to mimic a lot of damages on the DNA. So it's a small molecule called acidena, imagined by my colleague in Paris, and it's going to mimic genetic problem on the DNA of malignant cells only. So what happens on this schema that is simplified, of course, as you can imagine, at the beginning of the treatment, malignant cells strive to massively repair their DNA, bringing enzyme and so on, but for nothing, once again, because it is a fake drug. So a lot of them are going to die exhausted, and the only way they have to become resistant to this treatment is to stop to respond, even if they take the risk to be killed in case of real attack. So it is exactly the principle of the smoke detector. If there is one alarm in the room where you are at the moment, probably you will think that there is a fire and you will go outside immediately. But if there is an alarm every 15 seconds, you will say, probably it's a false alarm and I take the risk to stay. But if you take the risk to stay, you also take the risk to be killed if it was a real fire. And this response is in fact universal in the living world. It is demonstrated that when the rate of false alarm increases, the threshold at which you're going to respond is going to increase too, even if you take the risk to be killed. And we do the same, and as you can understand, when malignant cells do not respond anymore, at the end of the process, we send a real attack, and it is the best way to eliminate a lot of them. It is also well known in ecology that you can keep constant the size of a population by exerting a double constraint on the population. For instance, this small rodent has its population that are canalized just because they have the choice between going into a habitat where they are victim of predation by owls, and to prevent this predation, they can go in another place where they are victim of predation by snakes. Because of this double constraint, there is the population that is stable. So it is well known that in medicine that it works, especially against viruses. And it works also with malignant cells, because malignant cells are not Darwinian demon that would be resistant to everything. If they are sensitive to certain therapies, they can be, if they are resistant, to certain therapies, they can be sensitive to others. And evolutionary sciences can also be very relevant to know in which order we should apply different therapies. And this is from the biology of the extinction. So it is well known, even for dinosaurs, that an extinction follow almost all the time the same process. You have a large population, and there is one major event that we can say one strike, first strike, that is going to transform this large population into a smaller one, not eradicate totally the population only once, but is going to reduce below the minimum viable threshold. And then it's a lot of different smaller processes that would have had no effect on the large population that are going to finish the second attack, the second strike, and lead to the extinction. So if we apply this logic of extinction to malignant cells, we would have, for instance, a first strike that could be, for instance, a neoadjuvant therapy that is going to transform a large and big tumor into a smaller one with a lower genetic diversity inside. Then we have to stop the process, even if it works. Why usually nowadays we continue a therapy when it works. We should stop it, else we take the risk to select for resistant malignant cells. And then to finish the work with a second strike with a lot of different smaller therapies that would have had no effect on the large one, but can lead to the extinction without selecting for resistance. For the Professor James de Gregory, the problem of cancer is not the mutation. If you look at your arm, for instance, you will be horrified to see that it is full of mutation, especially the parts that are exposed to the sun, and you do not necessarily have a skin cancer. So the problem is not the mutation. The problem is when the cells that carry these mutations are in an environment that is good for their proliferation. So it means that instead of treating the cancer, we should try to treat the environment in which they are. So of course, it's sometimes challenging because the landscape is going to evolve. For instance, during the life, when we get old, it is worse if you smoke, but it means that all the therapies that are based on the idea we're going to treat the environment of malignant cells are full of sense from an ecological and evolutionary point of view. Cancer kills us because, in fact, it evolves too fast compared to our life expectancy. But if instead of trying to eradicate cancer, we would try to slow down its progression, for instance, by 2 or even better by 3. If we can do that, most, if not all cancer will occur a long time after we will be already dead, and cancer won't be anymore a problem. And there are a lot of evolutionary direction to reduce the speed of cancer, to slow down its progression. You can, for instance, reduce the mutation rate, to slow down the division rate, to reduce the differential fitness value between cells so that there is a competition between them and so on. When the tumor is growing, it's only the net result of diverse interactions that are not only cooperation. Inside the tumor, you have a lot of different kinds of ecological interactions, including parasitism, competition, predation by the immune system. So that if we learn what we call the tumoral ecology, we can, in theory, learn how to exacerbate the interactions that are destructive for the tumor. It's very difficult to eradicate cancer because cancer is highly variable. But cancer is not self-sufficient. It is like a parasite inside the body that absolutely necessitate healthy cells to collaborate with it. And healthy cells are not necessarily very variable. If they are not variable, it means that they are easier to kill. So instead of eradicating the cancer, if we try to eradicate the healthy cells that are manipulated, you will have cancer that cannot be something else that's something self-sufficient, and it's not possible to do that. So it means that all the therapies that are based on the treatment of the microenvironment are also full of sense. At the moment, as I told you before, we die from cancer mostly from metastasis, not from primary tumor, but paradoxically, we don't know exactly why malignant cells decide one day to leave the primary tumor to establish other colonies. There are a lot of different hypotheses that are well known for biologists that explore the biology of dispersion, of migration in a lot of species. And as we published a few years ago, there are interesting parallels that could be studied. Evolutionary biologists are also very relevant to predict which tumor will evolve into the invasive ones that are able to kill you. So you have here Carlo Male, who is working in Arizona in a big center in which evolutionary biologists and oncologists are working together. And they recently published in Nature Review Cancer this paper in which, by applying ecological and evolutionary criteria, they try to predict which part of oncogenic process can evolve into that. So they use an eco-evo index, eco for ecological, evo for evolutionary. And with different modalities in this index, they've been able to classify 16 types of tumors. So the less dangerous ones, they're called desert, or malignant cells that are tumors, for instance, with a very low turnover, poor level of irrigation, or in fact, they are evolutionary inert. And there is absolutely no need to treat such kind of tumors. And the most dangerous ones are called the rainforest, tumors with a strong turnover, strong level of irrigation, high predation by the immune system, so that very rapidly malignant cells become invisible to the immune system. And of course, these ones must be treated. So we can hope in the future that oncologists will use in routine such kind of eco-evo index, and we will be able to treat only the malignant cells that are dangerous for us. So just to conclude, I would like to say that nearly 50 years after President Nixon declared the war on cancer, we had fantastic progress, of course, and we must acknowledge this and recognize the fantastic work that has been done. But unfortunately, as you know, we still massively die from cancer, especially metastatic cancers that are still incredibly hard to cure. And undoubtedly, one of the reasons is that we have in front of us an enemy that has a Darwinian behavior. So I think that more than ever, we need transdisciplinary teams to work on cancer, especially involving evolutionary biologists, because it is an evolutionary problem. So I'm not saying that evolutionary biologists come with the solution. I'm just saying that we are watching the same forest that oncologists, but with a different angle, so that we can see novel trees, and by working together, we can improve our understanding in cancers, and to improve the way to eradicate it and to reduce the human suffering that is coming with it. So if you have been interested with what I said today, I encourage you to read this book that we edited in 2017, Ecology and Evolution in Cancer. If you understand French, I published this book 2 years ago. And recently, my colleague Athena Actipis, based in Arizona, also published this very interesting book. I would like to thank you again for your invitation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to answer to your question. Thank you.